I wanna start a family, anyone can join. I wanna start a family, anyone can join.
Change is inescapable, we are all erasable, but we're irreplaceable.
Together as one.
Water coming from the shore, wind is ripping rain away. We are only scraping by till there's only clear blue sky. We were right and we were wrong. We're alive but not for long.
I wanna start a family, together as one.
Hi podcast listeners, it's me Brandy Mays. I am here today to introduce a show I shot last October with Richard Stewart. Richard Stewart is the manager of Carriage Farms. In this conversation he's going to talk about how climate change is affecting his farm, and also he's going to talk about how important it is to support local farms and businesses, and talk about his CSA program. I'm very excited to share the show with you. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for listening.
Yeah, so Carriage House Farm is an Ohio sesquicentennial farm. We've been around for over 150 years. It's single family owned since 1855. I took over part of the farming back in 2002. We've been building the farm up from what was basically a rental farm where we'd rent out the farmland to another neighboring farm. Took over all the commodity crop farming, built stables, started a market garden, coupled with honey production with beehives. Right around 2012, 2013, after we had kind of established ourselves in Cincinnati's restaurant scene, we started doing on-farm dinners, starting off with a chef by the name of Ryan Santos, who owns the restaurant Please in downtown Cincinnati. And that led into him doing his own dinner series the first year, followed by us kind of taking over that series where we had chefs come on farm that we supplied to kind of do a full circle farm to table dinner where a combination of fans of the farm or fans of the chef would come out and dine while the chef prepared a meal 15 feet away from them at a table. Nice, quaint, 13 people per dinner. And that kind of led to all of this right here, which was the establishment of a new facility on our farm that would help us expand that experience for people that wanted to come to the farm. First part of the production, phase one, if you will, where it's the barn that we're in right now. Second phase will be an addition to the back of the barn that will allow us to start doing alcohol production and classroom experiences, combined with a couple other businesses that will move in with us, and where the farm will act as sort of an incubator, if you will. So right now, the first business is Madhouse Vinegar, and that's a business that I co-own with my business partner, Justin Dean. That business is built around repurposing of food waste, both on-farm vegetable and fruit production, as well as neighboring farms. Places like Holmeyer Orchard, they may have more plums than they know what to do with. So the farm uses some of those plums to make a plum jam, but we'll also make a plum vinegar from that, the seconds and the thirds and anything where if they have a rainfall that causes a fungus or something that might cause them to have to harvest everything right away, they may not have the market for it. So we act as a source to do bulk repurposing of their product. We buy it from them at a discounted price. and provide them a market that they may not normally have. We also work with local breweries and wine distributors and distillers, repurposing products that they may have past date beer, or they were working on a sour beer that suddenly picked up acetic acid and started turning into vinegar rather than a lactic acid sour beer. And we take those beers and we make malt vinegars out of them. We take the wines and we make a red wine vinegar and a rosé vinegar and a white wine vinegar. And then we do a bunch of small, custom, small batch, seasonal vinegars that take advantage of what we have growing wild, like ramps or pawpaws or spice bush berries. And this part of our business has given us experience in material handling and base wine making production, and we hope to expand that eventually within the next year or two, so that we're actually producing our own wine here and beer and distilled products. So the farm's kind of moving towards bringing people to the farm rather than sending food out to the people. The goal is to get as many people, especially from our local community, on farm as much as possible. So between classroom events, food options in terms of like wood-fired pizza, burgers, where we're not pushing the envelope of like what you consider like an entree meal. But you might get a rabbit morel sausage pizza, which would be an incredibly unique pizza for somebody that wants to kind of dabble in the unique local food experience, but may have kids with them that only want a cheese pizza. So that's kind of where we're at right now. A lot of stuff's changed over the last 10 years. We have a CSA now, which we didn't have 10 years ago when we were doing vegetable production. Then we have our own on-farm market now that has moved from being outdoors in the garden area to the brick and mortar front end of this space right here. So you can come 3 days a week and purchase items that were grown here on the farm, items that use our farm products, our whole foods, botanicals, cornmeal, fruits, some of the vinegar even, in their products. So Chocolates Latour is a chocolate company based in Northside. She uses a lot of our botanicals and the vinegar and our honey and our grapes in her chocolates, and so we sell her chocolates here. We sell 16 Bricks bread, which uses cornmeal to dust the surfaces of their space, so that every loaf of bread picks up a little bit of Carriage House Farm on it. Even though we're not an ingredient in the bread, you can find our cornmeal on the bottom of every loaf. And Swan Maiden soap, not a food item, but soap usually goes hand in hand with produce and vegetables and fruit at a farmer's market. And so she'll use our cornmeal as kind of the grist or the grit in her mechanic soap and her gardener soap. My name is Richard Stewart. I'm a farmer, and I believe in climate change. I believe that the science supports climate change, and here in the Ohio River Valley, we have had traditionally a collision between Canadian cold air, sometimes weather patterns coming out of the west. Everybody knows it is like Tornado Alley. So a lot of moisture comes up from the Gulf of Mexico. Canadian fronts coming out of Canada bring a lot of dry, cold air. So we have this kind of back and forth that happens a lot of times. In Cincinnati, I think one of the sayings is, it's raining now, wait 3 hours and it will be a different weather. And so Cincinnati's been known to have shifts in weather, but lately we've seen an increase in temperature. This year's been like a whopper. It's been the second worst drought we've had. It's been the worst drought we've had since in the past 6 years. The drought in 2012, 2013 was the worst we had in 60 years, 70 years. So we've had these 2 back-to-back droughts in like a 6-year period. And then our rainfall totals are just increasing. By June of this year, we had reached our entire yearly rainfall totals. So anything we're getting now is above our normal average. And the spring was the wettest we had on record. So our farm is, I don't know, it's like farming on the River Nile in Egypt. It benefits you by leaving sediment on your farm so that you don't have to add nutrients to the farm. It adds nutrients because of the flooding. Erosion upstream leaves deposits of sand and loamy soil on our property. But it can also work against us in that once we plant crops on the river bottoms, it floods. And this year, our property, it's a mile-long piece of property. The riverbank is maybe 6 to 8 feet high. So it's not unusual for parts of our land to be flooded on a yearly basis. That's just living next to a river. But normally that flooding happens 2 to 3 times a year. And it's usually because we have a rainfall coming right after a snowstorm or ice, so that the rain, rather than being absorbed in the ground, just sheets right off of it into the creeks and streams and floods into the river. And so there's no capacity for the ground to hold that moisture. Since November of last year, we flooded something like 18 or 19 times. So, I mean, the difference is tremendous. And this isn't, this year, while unique in the number of times, we've seen a progression over the last 10 years where every year we seem to be getting wetter and wetter and wetter in this spring. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have, I mean, we're digging deep here. An ice pack around the North Pole, you have the Arctic Circle. That ice pack, which is normally deep and cold, has been getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And that cold mass would keep a very stabilized jet stream, just going in a circle. You'd have unique events like, you know, if anybody remembers the blizzard back in like '76, and we had this huge cold spike, and the river froze, and huge winds and lots of snowing, lots of snowfall, a lot of blowing snow. So you had these huge drifts. That's should be a unique event. And what we're doing now is we're seeing more of these cold kind of expresses coming through the area. So we'll have a milder winter overall. Like the average mean temperature will be fairly warm compared to previous years, but then we'll have these 1 to 2 week periods where it'll be 10 degrees, 8 degrees. And the summers and spring especially, we're seeing that kind of translate into moisture. So we get these huge dips in the jet stream where it's going all the way down to Mexico. And then when it loops back up, it's bringing all this moisture with it from the Gulf. And it just rains straight up that valley. And it's not just us. I mean, traditionally, we've been a fairly high rain, high moisture, humidity. I mean, Cincinnati's known for its humidity. And but you're seeing it come up rather than kind of gradually through the Mississippi River and Ohio River valleys. You're seeing it come up in like the Dakotas and Nebraska and Iowa and everything kind of west of the Mississippi River. So you're having all these massive flood events that are just ruining other farms. We're lucky in that where we're located right now, we're in like the 1,000-year flood zone, and which is where most of Cincinnati is. And the water gets up here, we got way more issues than just the water being here, because 3/4 of the region's economy is all underwater at that point. What we're doing is we're trying to do what we call more plasticulture, which is the use of plastic, and you hate to rely on plastic, but it's the use of greenhouses to shed the amount of water so that you can stabilize that. So you're providing the water for the crop rather than Mother Nature doing that. It also acts as kind of a windbreak so that you don't have devastating winds and hail, because hail, while it will dent metal, if you have an inflated roof on a high tunnel, unless it's really heavy hail, it just bounces off of it. If you have a crop out in the field, even a light hailstorm will punch holes through lettuce leaf and cabbage heads and completely de-leaf tomato vines. I mean, it's a farmer's worst nightmare is a heavy hailstorm, because it ruins everything. And so the plastic culture helps us do that. It's also finding crops that do better either in droughty conditions or wet conditions. Because wet conditions, you have a lot of root rot and blight funguses. Different types of pests start developing because you have either a warmer culture. The more drought that we have, the drier the condition, the soil, the grasses, the more pressure we have from local animals as well. So deer, raccoons, chipmunks, squirrels, wasps. Wasps will sting fruit to get moisture, and then those holes will open and develop, and ants will crawl in them, and then suddenly you've lost a pear or an apple or something like that. And the drier the condition is, the more you have to water, the more stressed the plant is, the more disease you may get within your plants. So we get this really weird kind of Mother Nature's bipolar, because we have this wet spring now followed by a dry season, and they both kind of work in unison to either prevent us from planting or ruining the harvest. So we're trying to find crops that function better in that window. It's been tough. A lot of what we're looking for lately has been Mediterranean crops, stuff coming out of Italy. That's also in demand with chefs here locally in Cincinnati. Different types of greens, but crop varieties coming out of Japan, Korea, and China as well. As an example, we're growing a lot of Asian pears now because the Asian pears really don't have the same pests that we have, that they have in China. For some reason, the insects don't go to those types of fruits immediately, especially. And so we're looking at soup beans that may have come out of India, where you have a drier and wetter culture, where you have these extremes when you have a rain season and then a dry season. But they also have to be short. It can't take, like we grow yellow ginger and we harvest it in a baby stage where it's white and pink rather than yellow with a paper skin. And it's very tender. There's no woodiness to it. It's not yellow, but it's yellow ginger. And the crop does well in this wet, dry cycle, but it's also a crop that takes 6 months to develop. So it's a very long, painstaking, it takes up a lot of geography in the garden without a lot of return till October. And so some crops, while they may do well, may not necessarily be the right alternative. We do it just as a specialty crop to supply to chefs. We used to grow a lot of it, but we were working the numbers and we realized that it was just taking up too much space, and we should be running 2 or 3 crops through that same ground. But that's an example of a crop that does well in the climate that we're experiencing now. Just because we know things are changing doesn't necessarily mean that change is a permanent change. We may have excessive rain this year and a mild lead into spring, but next year it could be a dry winter that is cold all the way till May, just because we don't have this stable jet stream now. It may favor us next year, and then all these changes that we do are for naught because the environment was perfect that year for what we normally would be growing. So it's a nightmare. And that's why plasticulture, greenhouses, hoop houses, mulch beds, plastic laid beds where you're punching holes in plastic and watering through those holes, and you have crops growing through the plastic that prevent weed growth. All of those systems allow you to stabilize that change, good or bad. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. So, and vinegar makes the world go round. This we can produce all year round, regardless of the weather. So this helps stabilize some of what we do down. We're gonna continue to do the CSA, even though we're losing Greg. Ann is going to be taking over the CSA, and it'll probably be, rather than having one personality involved in the CSA, we'll probably have 2 or 3. So we'll have the actual management of the members of the CSA handled by one person, whereas Ann will be handling the harvesting, and we have what we call work share members, where they pay a discounted price, but then they have to work an hour to 2 hours per week for that share. And this is a 22-week CSA, so that's anywhere between 22 to 44 hours in a season. So from May until November, which sounds really simple, but some people are like, oh my gosh, I still have 8 hours to work off, and we've only got 4 weeks left in the CSA. But they help out immensely. You know, we use the CSA very strategically in terms of the work share group to harvest all the garlic at one time, like these labor-intensive, large projects where it's really simple to tell a large group of people, all we're going to do is do this, or we're going to start cleaning up the garden heading into fall, or we're going to plant garlic. And the group helps out immensely. It allows us to get some big projects knocked out real quickly. It's not just labor; it's a variety of roles. And then the CSA is nice because it kind of develops a community, and we've got a Facebook group where it's just CSA members only, and everybody shares recipes. We retain about a half to 2/3 of the previous year's membership, and then so there's always like this third that's always kind of new, and the nice thing about it is they may not know what to do with kohlrabi, and it's just traditional German, European crop. It's part of the it's cabbage, basically, and nobody knows what to do with it. But the older members, the members that have been there for a year or two, they're like, oh yeah, here's a recipe that we did, and they share it with everybody, and it makes our task of sharing information and educating our customers easier, because you've developed a community, and everything's easier when you have a community pitching in, and in a way we thank them by doing a potluck where we provide the base for the dinner, and everybody shares a dish. We bring we do all the grill work and provide all the beverages, and we'll do switchel, which is a vinegar-based drink, and we'll have music, and everybody just kind of gets together, and you have people bringing, you have single couples and friends coming, and then you have husbands and wives bringing their kids, and grandparents bringing their children and their grandchildren to the event, and we end up having like 100 people at this thing, just all kind of sitting around a couple tables, talking about food, talking about the year, and it's just a fantastic thing to see. And you realize that food is just like this one common denominator that everybody has, and that's what we're hoping to build on. That the idea is that people will come here if they can bring their children, feel safe and comfortable and let their children play out in the grass, throw a ball or a frisbee while they're up here consuming alcohol and eating food, and rather than having to race off to another thing, they spend time. And the goal isn't to get them to buy more stuff. The goal is just to say, slow down, take a load off, relax, and realize that you're here. This thing's been here for over 150 years, and you get to be involved in it in some way, shape, or form, and call it your own, because you just enjoy spending time there. And that the CSA is this tip of this big project that we're working on getting people to come here and have some ownership in the food production, knowing where their food comes from, and then also kind of giving us feedback on what they like and what they don't like. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to stop growing kohlrabi. I love kohlrabi, but if the kohlrabi's being wasted, that might be something that we direct towards the chefs rather than the CSA. Outback Steakhouse isn't Australian food. It's our Americanized version of whatever somebody thought was, I don't even know what to call it. But it's the same wherever you go in the United States. There's no food culture involved there. It's seasoned steaks provided by Cisco Foods, not even cooked in-house. They're all pre-cooked to a certain point. To avoid liability, most of the stuff's all prepared off-site and brought there. And they're contracted out. All of your produce is processed in a big, huge warehouse somewhere. You have no idea where the produce came from. Most likely California or Central America or South America, most likely. That's not what food culture is. We've become used to it. We say, what's going in at that location? Oh, it's an Olive Garden. And you're like, do we need another Olive Garden? Why isn't some mom pop, why isn't it a Greek Euro restaurant where, this family's had this rich culture of being, it's like Cincinnati chili. Everybody knows Cincinnati chili, but there's some like hardcore family-owned single restaurant Cincinnati chili locations where that family's been doing it for the last 60 or 70 years. And they may not be necessarily sourcing locally, but they are part of our local food culture. And so there's this weird, where does local food fit into all of that? Is it the one-off franchise that's locally owned McDonald's? Because that's, it's locally owned by somebody, but it's part of a national chain. To me, that's not local. I mean, it's a locally owned business, but you need whole foods that were produced regionally, that have grown in our soil, that are grown because of our local weather systems, because of our soil types, because of the amount of moisture in the air. All of these things create a type of food that can be grown. And it doesn't necessarily, in this day and age, it doesn't necessarily need to be just native crops or what we consider, 1950s, cabbage. And it can be a blend of like mizuna from Japan, or like a hikuri sweet Asian radish, which was not something that was of Cincinnatians 60 years ago, but it's something that does well here in our local ecosystem. And so the farmers collectively add to this food culture by selecting those crops that are available. And then the chefs that supply from local sources, from local restaurant or from local farmers, their menus then start reflecting what's available. And so there's this uniqueness that starts to develop that only Cincinnati can own, or the Ohio River can. I have to be fair to all of our northern Kentucky folks and southeastern Indiana, because we've got this weird, we're on a border, and the Ohio River is the culture, not necessarily Cincinnati, but the Ohio River is the culture, and that kind of stretches between here in Louisville and here in Lexington and here in Dayton, and maybe even Athens. So we got a little mix of Appalachia, and we've got Germans coming over in the late 1800s that add to that. So we've got this sauerkraut, and we've got Geta, and you're like, Geta. Everybody's like, what's Geta? And you're like, oh man, it's pork and peanuts, and it's fried, and it is good. And everybody looks at you like you're crazy. When people come here from LA or from Chicago, we've got things that they may not necessarily have experienced in their hometowns. And that is what we should want to create, because the United States is a huge place. I mean, we're what, 3 times the size of Europe. And if you travel from country to country in Europe, I mean, you have sub-regional food cultures. I mean, if you're in Italy, there's a southern Italy and there's a northern Italy, and they are 2 distinct different cultures in Italy. And then within those geographical regions, there are other subcultures that even have their own subset of the Italian language. And they all have their own food cultures as well. And Europe's done a very good job, Europe as a whole has done a very good job preserving a lot of those food cultures. I mean, they still have some homogeny in terms of foods and stuff like that. But in the United States, we like blew past all of that. Rather than embracing all these different cultures coming over and having, you know, basking in the glow of the real true Italian diet, we've got this Americanized version of it. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that version suddenly starts developing because we develop a food system that provides all the food from the valley in California, which is, you know, 85% of the lettuces, mixed salad greens, all comes from California. Why not grow, you know, all that here? And it won't be exactly the same as what you get in California, but that's okay. And there might be a seasonality to it, and that's okay too. But we want to try to have everything all the time in whatever quantities we want, and that leads to weird food chains that may not be sustainable long term. And so local food to me, after I've been rambling on, is a diverse food culture that represents your region, both the talent of the chefs and then what farmers can supply them. It gives you a sense of food security as well, because, I mean, what happens if California continues to have a drought and they pump out all of their wells in terms of irrigation, and they start reducing the amount of leafy greens and artichoke and you know, pick a crop. California produces most of the vegetable crops that we consume in the country. What happens if that decreases? Who picks up the load? You can't just create a new produce farmer. I mean, you need to have the land, you need to have the expertise. And so that food culture also, that local food culture also gives you some resiliency in times of economic woe as well, or environmental woe, or whatever you want to call it. Local food also impacts the local economy in that when you buy food from us, either as a retail customer or as a chef, you're putting dollars into our pockets that then go to our employees, and those employees then spend money locally. we also support local businesses. So if I need something right away, I don't go to Lowe's or Home Depot. I go to Merrill's Hardware, located in Cleves. They got 3 locations, and it is 100% locally owned. And the owners' kids are 3 grade levels, 4 grade levels ahead of my kids in the same exact school. So there's this great economy and culture that's developed there that happens on several levels. That's just absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's the way it should be. It's you develop a culture like that, and if one person goes out of business, it doesn't impact everybody, even though it doesn't shut everything down. If you have a GM plant that hires 20,000 people in the community, it may be a fantastic thing economically short term. But when they decide to close their doors, it destroys the economy. But if you have a lot of small businesses that are kind of interwoven and interactive with each other, one of those small businesses goes down, nothing else goes down with it. Everybody kind of fills in the gaps. It's really difficult to rebuild after a huge employer leaves. You know, what would happen to Cincinnati if like P&G shut down? I mean, it would be a horrible economic impact. But what happens if we had the economic capacity of P&G set up by 1,000 different small businesses? It would be far more resilient long term than a large corporation. So that, to me, that's local food. It's good for the economy. It's good in terms of knowing where things are coming from, and it develops a culture that you have ownership of.
Thank you guys for listening. I hope you are inspired to visit Carriage House Farms. You can find out more of what they have to offer and how to get to their farm stand or other places that they are located by going to the website or the Facebook page. Until the next show, peace and love.